Hello, I'm Jothy Rosenberg, the host of Designing Successful Startups, where today's guest is Gwen Hannema.
I would say in general, Europe, we are less willing to take risk. And also with respect to failing, if you mention here in Switzerland, typical environment, you say, I failed 2 startups. People say, oh, wow, you're a failure. Why did you continue and persevere? And in the US, when I met last week in Davos, there was a US investor. And when I say I failed 2 startups before, I say, oh, that's good. So
in this episode, Gwen and I talk about his amazing multilingual background. His dad speaks 8 and his mom speaks 6 languages. With a strong drive to accomplish that himself, based on knowing that no matter what happens in life, no one can take that away from him. Gwen went from an engineering background to starting 3 MedTech startups so far. He's had bumps in the road, even failures, as he calls them, but he learned from his mistakes, as we all do. He has a strong vision for his current startup called OrthoSens that allows critical sensors inside the body to send real-time data to receivers outside the body without the risk of a battery inside the body failing. He is motivated by family members with serious back pain. Just like me, Gwen's profile and grit is based on a disability. His is that he is dyslexic, and at 8 years old could still not read, whereas mine was losing a leg and a lung before I was 19. Both of us were told what we can't do. Gwen's brothers were not dyslexic, so he learned to work twice as hard to get ahead, and when teachers dismissed him as never going to make something of himself, with the backing of very wise parents, he fought back and refused to accept can't. Similarly, my rallying cry became "Who says I can't?" whenever someone tried to manufacture a roadblock in front of me. Both of us refused to accept that defeatism in life and in business, and that grit has sustained us just as it sustains all startup founders. Hello, Gwen. Welcome to the podcast.
thanks for having me.
Can we start off by having you tell everybody where you're originally from and where you live now?
So originally I was born in Canton, Bern, so capital city of Switzerland. Then I moved around in Canton, Solothurn, to the Netherlands, in Gouda, then in France for a couple of years, Switzerland, in Lausanne, had the chance to do my master's thesis in Melbourne, in Australia, and then back to Switzerland. And so I had to travel a bit around. And now we are based in Canton, Jura, where we are developing our startup.
So big, huge circle back to Switzerland.
Correct, that's it. And you can hear from my accent, I'm half Swiss, half Dutch. And my English accent, you have the typical Dutch, you have, if I exaggerate a bit. So this is just to have a bit of my background.
So it's good to, when you mentioned the town you were in Holland, when I was young, we had what we call an au pair, like it's someone from a foreign country usually who comes and stays. And ours was from Amsterdam. And she taught us all to say Gouda correctly.
Cool, fantastic. So, I wouldn't say that the cheese is good there, but at least you can put it on the map.
Yeah. So it was funny because this past summer, we were in Amsterdam on the beginning of a river cruise that starts in Amsterdam and ends in Budapest. And so we were with a tour guide and she held up a big round of cheese and she said, "Does anybody know what this is?" And I said, "Gouda." And she looked at me like, what is going on? Why does an American know that? Because everybody in America calls it Gouda, and it's hard to hear that. Anyway, so wait a minute. Which is your first language?
So French is my mother tongue. Also Dutch with more on my father's side, and mother's side is French.
I see. So pretty much equal those two.
Correct.
And then you obviously English quite well, and you must have had to learn a few extra words when you were over in Australia. They have a few funny words for things. Well, they're not funny to them. And then besides those 3, what else do you speak?
Fluently Portuguese. And my wife is half Brazilian, Spanish and Italian. So I've learned Portuguese. Spanish, I've traveled in South America for 3 months backpacking before starting my first startup. And so I learned it also in school, but then I mixed with Portuguese. So I stopped and now I'm 100% so fluent in Portuguese, and then Spanish I will catch up, and also a bit of German.
Okay. And what languages will you try to have your kids learn?
That's a good question. My daughter actually speaks French, Portuguese. She started also with English. She's 3 years old. And she started school now in German. So keep gentle. I'll start Dutch. later on, but she's already tackling 4 languages at 3.
I don't know how that brain can do that. It's unbelievable. I wish we had that built into our education process over here, but we don't.
With that, I'm grateful that, it was more on my parents' side. My father speaks 8 languages, my mother 6, and my older brother learned Chinese. He's been living 5 years in Guangzhou. And they told us already one thing since we were young. They said, learn languages because everything can happen in life, but nobody can take that away from you. And I'm trying to give that back somehow, to transmit that also to my daughter, because I think it's really opens a lot of possibilities.
So your daughter is 3. Okay. Yeah, so that's just, that's when they're just beginning to learn a single language. That's just astounding. Okay, so you told me that you had an engineering background and you got your master's in what branch of engineering?
So I finished my master in mechanical engineering. I had a specialty in aerodynamic, fluid dynamic, and computational simulation. And then I managed during my master's, that's the first introduction, I would say, to the MedTech field, because in Melbourne, I was studying the stability of arteriosclerotic plaque, aneurysm, etc., and to be able to qualify that with a numerical model. And then it was my first step in the MedTech field. And I can combine basically the two between engineering and medical. And that's when it started, thinking about the first startup in the MedTech field back in 2012.
But what was the thing that you saw not being done or not being done well that made you make that jump and start that first one?
Well, I would say the first startup was back in 2012 with a friend. We finished studying at EPFL, so the Swiss Institute of Engineering in Lausanne. And basically, we were quite into 3D printing and numerical models. And we said, well, we can optimize, leverage, the design freedom that is offered by 3D printing to develop a whole lot of products. So one was doing this a custom insole that could adapt to a specific foot from each patient. We also wanted to look into 3D printed heart valves. But in the end, we didn't manage to convince with respect to the proper business model between consultancy service and developing our own product. So after 2 years, we stopped, but it was already a good learning. And then I took on a job as a researcher in Dübendorf, close to Zurich. And 6 months later, I started my second startup that was more related really to back pain, treating back pain in a percutaneous way. So if you have irradiating back pain, it goes all the way through your legs. And I was quite familiar with that topic because in my family, I've close family members that suffered from lumbar stenosis or different kind of back pain. And so there it starts really iterating on what could we do and what was not done. And there the idea was basically, instead of putting a standard screws, 4 screws and 2 rods in the patient back, we wanted to place percutaneously, so in 15 minutes instead of 2 hours, a small implant that was basically widening up again the space between the vertebrae to do a decompression. And you could do that in an outpatient procedure instead of a normal inpatient as it was still currently done. And so that's where it started. We got along. Maybe we'll discuss a bit later what went wrong and what we could potentially avoid with a big inactive shareholder, an active founder dispute that ended up killing the company. But then I learned a lot during that journey. Now I started my third one, flying solo now. And there we are basically developing implantable sensors to make implants talk. So any standard orthopedic implant, we can integrate our sensors in it, battery free. It's externally powered, and then we can get key physiological data to the patient, surgeon, and healthcare professional.
So I may be jumping to conclusions, but so you haven't told me any of the details, but you had on number 2, you had issues with founders, which
Correct.
I've had numerous times. I think I've had 3 major catastrophes because of a founder that just kind of goes, I don't know, crazy. And I don't mean crazy in the diagnosis kind of way. I just mean causing just a lot of pain and trouble. Anyway, the jumping to conclusions is, so then you said, this one, I'm solo. There are other way to solve the founder's problem other than not having one.
Right. No, absolutely. It was just in terms of launching. So I'm open, to have also a late co-founder if he or she can bring really some value to the company. It was more back then in the time when I had to launch. I said, okay, let's go. This one, you have other challenges from investors that say, yeah, from a risk perspective, if I invest in a company, you're a solo founder that had also other barriers. But I think learned a lot during the previous journey, and have some entrepreneurial scars that I can also leverage and when I talk to investors.
Well, let's talk about the environment. What do you think about the environment of trying to do a startup? And maybe we should be specific, a MedTech startup in Switzerland or in whatever you know about sort of more broadly in Europe, compared to the sort of hotspots for startups, which is sort of the Northeast United States, Silicon Valley. Maybe there's a pocket or two elsewhere like Austin, Texas. But what do you think of the challenges that you're facing that may be harder for you than if you were doing this somewhere in the States, let's say?
That's a great question. I would say in general, in Europe, we are less willing to take risk. And also with respect to failing, if you mention here in Switzerland, in typical environment, you say, I failed 2 startups. People say, oh, wow, you're a failure. Why do you continue and persevere? In the US, when I met last week in Davos, there was a US investor. And when I say I failed 2 startups before, I say, that's good. So it's a more, I would say from that aspect, we have a long way to go in Europe. We are way more risk adverse than in the US. I wouldn't, in terms of Switzerland, I say we have quite some tools for non-dilutive funding. For instance, with the previous company, managed to secure roughly 2 million in non-dilutive funding to take the project off the ground. In this one, we are roughly 500,000, and we are preparing. So there are different mechanisms of grants that you can have for research grants that can help get the project off the ground. But I would say then in this death valley that you typically have when you're between pre-seed, seed round, maybe here they are expecting way more in terms of product development. In the US, if you have a clear vision and already a product development roadmap to raise capital, I think it's way easier. I cannot judge, but it's the feedback I've heard also from quite a fellow entrepreneurs with their startup journey, and that they're now pivoting also to the US to raise more capital.
I can comment on 2 things you just said. One, the number of failures. I want to make you feel better, because prior to the one I have right now, and we don't know how it's going to end, I did 8. 2 had good outcomes. That means 6 did not. Okay. Now I wouldn't actually call all 6 of them failures. It's just that it's because some of them did sell. It's just that no one made any money. And so that's not considered a success. The one that I am currently still trying to find an exit for, it won't be a great exit either. And they say 8 out of 10 startups fail, right? I mean, that's a statistic that we bandy around all the time. Pretty much right on that. I won't do a 10th. I'm not doing another one. So it's
my question. I would have asked you if you would want to do one more.
No, I don't have to prove that, yes, indeed, 8 out of 10 fail, because that would say that it's going to be a failure. But I don't think it would be. But the lessons you learn are different for each one, right? And you try not to make the same mistake that you made before. But the situation is never going to be exactly the same as what you had before. And all the things that you've learned from the previous ones are extremely valuable to you and to others, which is one of the reasons why we do these podcasts, to try to, talk about what went wrong. And let's hear some of your challenges.
Well, I wanted to ask you the question: what would be your main 3 takeaways for the founders or the upcoming founders that listen to this podcast?
I think there are a set of things, and I think it's like, just about 5 things that you have to come out of the gate when you say, okay, I've got this great idea. I think it can change the world. And and the only way, of course, to do that is to create a company. So I want to create a company, and you say, and you have to focus on these 5 things, because unless you are rich and you're self-funding and you can afford not to raise outside money, the only way to really get going and raise a significant amount of money, where I'm talking about the Series A, is to prove product market fit. I'm kind of working from the end back to the beginning to prove product market fit and immediately get paying customers, because that's what proving product market fit means. And that is nowadays, it didn't used to be, it is nowadays an absolute requirement to raising a Series A. And Series A's can be pretty substantial. And then you're focused on growth. But you got to figure out, so the steps are, you got to figure out who should be the CEO. Now, that may seem easy in your case, but it's not always, because if there's a group of founders, then and suppose you're all scientists or you're all engineers, or in some way or another, you're not sales and marketing people. And I made a huge mistake. The first opportunity where I was being asked by my co-founders to be the CEO, and I had a pretty serious case of imposter syndrome. And because I was coming out of academia, I'd been a professor, I had something. I mean, it was a really good design for a supercomputer, and I understood there was a market need for it. And so we were going for it, but I had no sales and marketing experience whatsoever. And the first investor I met with kind of dug deep into that imposter syndrome and said, "Who the heck do you think you are being the CEO? You don't have the right credentials." And that made me just, want to go get that experience. But the other investor that I talked to next said, "No, that's wrong. The tech founder who can articulate and clearly and with passion, what is the problem that we're solving and why are we uniquely positioned to solve it?" Because in the first, you don't need a lot of customers to kind of prove these things. You need a handful. Without being a great sales guy who can manage other salespeople and can, put a process in place to grow the sales of the company, that's not what you need. You need somebody that can sell 3, 5 customers. And that could be a person that doesn't have any sales and marketing experience, but they can talk, till they're blue in the face about how great their thing is. And so who's the CEO? And then, getting the team. Okay, you got to have a strong team. It doesn't have to be the best team in the world, but they have to be a strong team. And you have to find a lighthouse customer, usually, that can help you define minimum viable product, and you iterate on that. And then you're going towards product market fit, and then you're selling those multiple customers. I do believe that if you come out of the gate and you do those 5 things and you let everything else not distract you, that you can dramatically increase the odds of success. Now, I just lectured to you on your podcast because you asked me a question. Hi, the podcast you are listening to is a companion to my recent book, Tech Startup Toolkit: How to Launch Strong and Exit Big. This is the book I wish I'd had, as I was founding and running 8 startups over 35 years. I tell the unvarnished truth about what went right and especially about what went wrong. You could get it from all the usual booksellers. I hope you like it. It's a true labor of love. Now back to the show.
That's great insight. And I also think for this imposter syndrome, I've heard early on from a fellow MedTech founder, that serial entrepreneur now. He stepped down. He grew his company. He's doing robotics surgery, and then he stepped down. And I think they reached 200 employees. And then he stepped down from the initial CEO position to the operational position, and now just to scale, because he recognized, I don't have now the experience. I managed to grow the company until this milestone. Now I leave it to more experienced people, and still learning on it. So this, I think, but at the same time, I think that with the technical background, you have still to learn, as you mentioned, the sale component, and that you're able to acquire the first 3 key customers. But then I think you can articulate, you have more tools in your toolbox to basically articulate what you're trying to do and achieve. But still, you should be aware at a certain point in time you can stretch, you can grow, but at a certain point in time, you have to be clear also, when do I step down, and when another person has more competence than me to be able to push this company forward in the next growth stage.
And I did that 3 times subsequent to this, this first startup. And, making that mistake and not being the CEO of that company, because it ended up selling on 2 million in revenue. It sold for 106 million, and not being there personally cost me 10 million. I still had some stock, but it cost me, not having founders CEO stock, cost me $10 million to make that. That was an incredible mistake, bigger than most people's mistakes. The bigger mistake, of course, is if you make a mistake that causes the company to completely fail. And what would you say? So you kind of alluded to some of the things that happened on number 1 and number 2. What would you say the biggest thing that caused their demise was, in each case?
I would say the first one, I mean, we just finished university. We just wanted to start. We had no business expertise or experience. And there, I would say we were too naive, thinking, everything, when you do your roadmap or from the funding side, from the product development side, we are too ambitious, and everything takes roughly twice or 3 times as long as you expected. If you're not able to reach those milestones, also from an investor perspective, they think that you're not able to deliver also on your promises. So the first one, I would say, we didn't have a convincing business model, because it was a kind of hybrid between a consultancy service with 3D printing and numerical optimization, which was still not trendy back then. The second one, I think this one was a big, also some, I would say, stupid mistakes. We incorporated the company. We were 3 equal shares, no vesting, no cliff, fully issued. And then we basically thought, okay, everybody should work at the same pace and the same contribution to the company. And in the end, we had no proper shareholder agreement also in place, because you were based on trust, and you think those people were way more senior than I was. And I thought that, okay, I will learn from them and from their business expertise, and you put a lot of faith and trust into people. But when it goes south, it's better to have all those contracts in place where you say, okay, we sat around the table, we agreed on what we'll do, how we will act in case something happens, and then you just remove all the emotional component out of the equation. And I think that was a big mistake that we did. And to give a bit of insights to the people who may want to launch a company, it may sound stupid simple, but really sit down together and look not only on the personal side, but the private side, what success would mean from a company perspective, and how do you want to structure your next 5 to 10 years of life on the private side as well. And then see if you can find something together that is basically that can combine with the different visions from each of the co-founder, and see from there how we can build a clear strategy to be able to move forward. And then obviously vesting, I mean, with respect to the shares, that you have a cliff clear at 12 months or 18 months, that you see who is contributing to what. Put maybe an independent advisor on your board. I'm not on the board of my own company. I have 2 external people. And so then we are able to clearly, differentiate between shareholder, a decision at the strategic level on the board, and then the execution team. And I think if you have already those things in place, it can avoid a lot of pitfalls. Because on my side, that's what happened. I mean, to a venture competition in Switzerland, and then the jury member, they just saw on looking on LinkedIn profile, okay, one founder is not active. She's doing 10 different things. Just she's not fully committed to the company. And then you want to go through maybe a reverse vesting or an exercise. It's not easy. But then we basically came into a lot of emotional in the equation. And then I said, okay, let's take an external mediator that can help us out in this process. So we have a neutral point of view that could assess and help us doing that. Managed to sign a settlement agreement. And then you think, okay, I signed a settlement agreement in front of a mediator that's doctor-in-law, everything. And in the end, then 2 weeks later, basically she doesn't want to comply, and she takes the company hostage again. So then you're like, okay, wow. What's going on? We had to recapitalize. We recapitalized the company because it was close to bankruptcy. And then we said, what are the learnings from that? Because when I was running around to seek for a different investor, they were all laughing at me and say, hey, Gwen, I mean, you had an inactive founder that took hostage the company. and now you want to be able to execute and deliver on your next milestones, but you don't have a proper shareholder agreement in place. I mean, no way. And obviously, it makes total sense. And I would say that was maybe at a certain point that I also learned is, you have to be emotionally detached from the problem that you're solving. And maybe because they were leveraging the fact that I was attached from a personal level, that people in my family were suffering from back pain, and that I wanted indirectly was a kind of childish dream to say, okay, I can develop something that I know will go in a body of a close relative, and I would have followed this whole development process. And I think they leveraged this emotional connection on my side. So that was a big mistake. I learned a lot, but I would say from the founders who are listening to us, go through this exercise. Look clearly how you want to structure the business. What are the objectives on the long run? Also in the private side, I mean, you want to have kids in the next couple of years. You want to move into other countries. I mean, just to see and how you can combine those elements, just to be sure that everybody is aligned and you have that in writing. I think that was a big learning from my side.
Well, what about the current one, OrthoSens? Has everything been going? First of all, tell us a little bit about where you want this to be in 5 years. And then could you also just say, has everything gone perfectly smoothly, or have there been any hiccups on this one? But not obviously serious ones, because it's still going fine.
Yeah. So we started the company 1 year ago, and we're basically developing those implantable sensors to integrate into any standard implants to make them talk and gather those key parameters. And our objective by 2029 is to positively impact 30,000 lives. So what we are aiming to do is solving a big problem in orthopedics. I mean, I will cite a quote Bill Hunter from Canary Medical. He's saying basically with surgical robots and everything, we are putting implants with micrometer precision in the body, but we are measuring the outcome with a sextant. And for me, that resonates quite strongly because it's true. I mean, for lumbar fusion procedure, you have over 250 techniques, 18 methods to be able to assess the outcomes for patients. And there's no standardization to be able to qualify those outcomes properly. I would say the long-term vision for the company is to be able to make implants talk and positively impact 30,000 lives by 2029.
Are there other types of sensors besides ones that are related to the spine that you could also begin to gather data from? Like, are there sensors that people put around in the heart or any other organs that would be measurable by you through the skin?
So yeah, there's one company that was required by Abbott or St. Jude Medical before. It's called CardioMEMS, and they were basically measuring the pressure inside of the arteries to be able to, and do that remotely to detect early failures. Basically what we have is, I can show you, I have a small example. This is a lift cage, so that you put for lumbar fusion, for instance. So you go from an anterior approach, and then they are basically regenerating the height between the vertebrae. So they remove your disc, and then they put it in between, and it will create a bone fusion between your vertebrae. And what we do is basically we can integrate inside of those existing implants with our own sensors. And then you have an external wearable device that is powering, a bit like your cooking stove, with inductive coupling. It's powering from the outside as one of our USP. And so we are not limited with an implantable battery life. Like, for instance, Canary Medical, if they want to do real-time data transmission, they'll be out of power in a couple of days. And we had a different approach by saying, well, let's put all the complexity outside of the body and be able to easily recharge those battery to power the implant, from the outside, and not have an embedded battery. Also, it will avoid me, I think, some gray hairs from a regulatory perspective to get that through the FDA.
Well, I was going to ask the big FDA question. How long will that take, do you think, once you're ready to get FDA approval?
That's a good question. For now, I think it's at least 2 years that we have to go through. We have to schedule a pre-sub meeting with them to really go through the different details and see if we agree on the product classification and then the evidence that they would need to clear the device. But basically, why did we go from Europe? It's a bit funny, but why from Europe you go to the US? And basically, with the new MDR, so medical device regulation, that's still a mess in Europe. We love to over-regulate things. Basically, we were up class. A lot of implants were up class to class 3 device. So that means that you have to do really stringent clinical trials with at least 2 to 3 year endpoint to be able then to hand in your regulatory dossier for them to give you the CE mark. Now here, what is interesting is in the US, as we can integrate into existing implants, we could integrate already the sensor and leverage predicate device. You don't attach a clinical claim to your sensor and your monitoring device, but then you're able to gather that data through real world evidence, with the post-market surveillance once it's in the market. And then you can file a separate standalone approach, standalone application. So it's a 2-stage approach, but you can already generate revenues. You're not getting reimbursed, but you can already generate revenues based on real world evidence afterward for the standalone application. So this is the strategy that we decided to go. And that's why the FDA pathway will enable us, I think, in a 2-year horizon to be then on the market once we're ready.
That's exciting. So, we always say that startup people must be gritty. They must have grit. And so where would you say your grit comes from?
That's a good. I can tell that I can confirm that a lot of people, they are always telling you as a founder the numbers of obstacles, and I think also on your side you faced it quite often. I would say one thing that really came is, well, first, since my young age, I'm dyslexic, and so I had always to work more than my 2 brothers to be able to in school, etc. So always had to put extra work to be able to achieve, let's say, the same result as they did. And then maybe on a personal side, what really happened is I always dreamt as a lot of young boys to be a pilot. I said, okay, let's go to the Champions League. Let's do a fighter jet pilot. And I never had the courage, to apply because the rejection are super high. I mean, I think in Switzerland you have more than 1,200, and it takes 6 to 7 per year. And the fact that I never had the courage to apply, once I finished graduation from university, I needed to do my mandatory military service. And then I knew that I had until 2024 where I could apply for fighter pilot. And I never had the courage to do that. And when the deadline ended, because I turned 24, I said, okay, you didn't have the courage to do that. And now not to have any more regrets in your life, I would always try to leave no stone unturned. So try everything. And if people tell you no with respect to the startup, if you believe in what you're doing, you should persevere, and you should say, okay, no, then I go to the next person. And the more doors you knock on, like the likelihood that somebody will tell that your story will resonate with them increases. So I think maybe those are the 2. I would say maybe the origin of that grit, but that you have to cultivate and nurture as a startup founder.
That's really an interesting story, because you've got both the disability and how that caused you. That's this thing of, that's adversarial that you had to overcome, which makes you work harder, which is good for you ultimately. But then you also had this other thing, which ultimately caused you to not say I can't. And the parallels between those 2 things in you and in me are amazing, because of the disability for me is that I lost a leg and a lung before I was 19, and had to recover from that and rebuild my self-esteem, which took, and in my case, I use sports, excelling at sports to do that. But then I also had everybody saying, well, you can't ski, you can't swim straight, you can't bike, all these things. And so every time I had somebody say, you can't, I'll never forget, there was an employee of mine who, when I was excited about giving money as a donation for someone that was trying to raise money by riding her bike from Boston to New York City, which is a 4-day ride. And the employee said to me, oh, you're so excited about that. Too bad you can't do that. And that day I bought a bike, and the next year I did it.
Wow.
And so it's the same. And those things that, the discipline and hard work from fighting back from a disability, and then not accepting, can't or something negative, also has, I think, set you up for the long term to be a very successful entrepreneur.
Wow, you had really to overcome a tough challenge as well. And I would say also one that just popped up is, when we arrived from the Netherlands, from Gouda, if you pronounce it correctly, to France, the mentality from the teacher was really different. In the Netherlands, if she had, for instance, I always remember that, because if you had, for instance, made some mistakes in writing or in your math, they were giving you some small stickers and say, hey, those you did really great. This one you should improve. I really like the mindset. And then you come in France. I mean, it was maybe not reflective from the school, but the first thing they did is that professor, she put me on the stage in front of everybody, and she made me speak in French. And I was shy, I had anxiety, I was also dyslexic, and I couldn't read. And everybody was making fun of that. And then I still remember that outside. And when she met with my mother, she said, wow, your boy is 8 years old. He's not able to properly read French. He will be nothing in life. And I still remember what she said. She said, yeah, but he is 8 and he speaks already 3 languages. What about you? And that I had always the chance that, my parents created this kind of safe environment where they say, doesn't matter what other people think. I mean, you work on your challenges, and those are then your own rewards. You will own that. So don't let people turn you down, maybe because they face something in their life and they're not able to lift you up. So I think was really something also that pushed me, and I had the chance to have that environment, at home, that my father and my mother, they always pushed us, saying you can choose whatever you want, we'll be there. And it gives you the courage to fail as well, and to pick yourself up. And I think I'm really grateful for that.
Was that scene with your mother like the first time you saw her publicly back you up and make you feel strength in the face of somebody being unfair?
That's a great question. I have to admit, before that, nothing pops up now, but I would say that at least was really something that really I remember. So I'm certain that based on her character, she would have done it also before if something was not fair, and she would have just said that. It's maybe more in Europe, you have the German speaking part, and no filter. I really like that. And I think she would have stood up for her kids, as most of the parents do. But this really resonated with me, because then it was a kind of mental switch where I said, okay, I have this environment, the safe environment where I can fail. Give me the courage, to just improve, knowing that I always have somebody that's backing me up.
Great story. That's just really a moving story. And I think that's a wonderful place for us to kind of wrap things up.
Time flew by.
Time did fly by, indeed. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me, and best of success to all the founders who want to start their journey. Trust in yourself, and don't take no for an answer. Believe in the dreams, and you will learn a lot during the journey.
Great words to end by. That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Today's takeaways are: learn languages because nobody can take that away from you. You have to be emotionally detached from the startup challenge you're solving. To avoid major problems down the road, it's important to have a proper shareholder agreement in place. Trust in yourself and don't take no for an answer. Emotional support from family can empower you to overcome challenges and develop the essential grit you need. And the show notes contain additional useful resources and links. Please follow and rate us at podchaser.com/designing successful startups. Also, please share and like us on your social media channels. This is Jotham Rosenberg saying, TTFN, ta-ta for now.